the next stage of our tutorial. That is to program the navigation. So the next stage is to program the navigation. So how do we program the navigation? So let's start with the first item. That is, when you click on this, to take you to next, right? I mean, to the first item, right? When you click on this, to take you to the last item. When you click on this, it takes you to the previous item, then it takes you to the first, to the next item. So when we are here, the first item. So first of all, we need to first check whether we are, the first item will have an index of what? 0, right? All right. So we first of all check and see if we are not already on, if ink is not already 0. If ink is 0, that is, if the row index is 0, it means we are already on the first item. So we shouldn't try to navigate the first item, right? If we are not on the first item, then we have to move to the first item. That is, we have to change ink to be equal to 0. If the row index is equal to 0, then we are on the first item, right? Then we just call navigate record to bring the record to the, to bring the data items to the various controls that are on the form. So here we'll first of all check if ink, that is, if the row index, right, is not equal to 0, then you should what? You should make it equal to 0. So ink should be equal to 0. And then you call navigate record, right? So you call the method to fill the user interface controls with data, right? If it is already on 1, right? Or if it is already 0, if the index at the time you want to click on the item or you want to click on the button is already 0, then it should tell you that you are already on the last record, right? You are already on the first record, right? So we use message box to show, and then just type a simple message. Maybe this is the first record, right? So once you do that, then you are done with this. So when you start, so this ink here, as I said, is actually the row index. So the row index for the first row will be 0. Row index for the second row will be 1, and then and so on and so forth. So once we want to move to the first item, we first of all have to check whether we are already on the first item or not, right? If we are not on the first item, so if ink is not equal to 0, it means we are not on the first item. Then we will have to force the cursor to move to the first item. And then once the cursor moves to the first item, then we would have to call the navigate record to load the data that is in the first item into the various controls that are on the form. But then if at the time we are clicking on the button, ink is already 0, that is, we are already on the first item, then we don't even need to do anything. We just print out a message telling the user he is already on the first item. All right. So the same principle will apply to all the rest, all right? So if we want to move to previous, right, the same thing, we'll have to check if we are not in 0, right? If we are already in 0, we cannot move to the previous one. There's nothing in the previous. But if you are not on 0, then we can subtract 1 from ink, right, to take us back 1. But if you are already on 0, it means you are already on the first record. So there's no way you can move back from there. All right. So the same thing we check. If ink is not equal to 0, then you check. If it is not equal to 0, then ink is equal to what? Ink minus 1. All right. Then you call navigate record. Else, then you print out the message, right? So you go end of records, or maybe you are on first record, right? So you can print the same message that you printed here. But just so that we can have some just so that we can have some little difference in the messages. So we could just say this is end of record. So once that, you print out this message. The same way, if you want to move to next, it's just the same thing, but this time we are not checking for 0. We are checking for the last item in the list. That is the maximum number of rows minus 1, right? That will give us the index of the last item. Okay, so we will check if we are on the last item. So we say if ink is not equal to what? Max rows minus 1, right? Then ink is equal to ink plus 1, right? Because if we are already not at the last row, then we can add 1 and move to the next row. But if we are already on the last row, then we cannot move next, right? We have to indicate that that's the last row, right? So we call navigate record. So we put else, then we print the message that says that at the last record, all right? So, and then the last code, which is the ETN last. So here, it will be a bit of a longer code than the rest, because you have to check if you are on the last. If you are not on the last, then you check, then you forcefully bring it to the last, so which is the max record minus 1. That is the index of the last record. So once you do that, then of course you print out a message. But because we are going to use a different method, so this same try method can be used for that. So we just have if ink is not equal to 0, is not equal to max row minus 1, then ink is equal to max rows minus 1, right? Then navigate record. Else, then the same thing that we copied, which is this is the last, this is the last record. This is the end of the records, something like this. So once you type this, so rather than that, you print out another message saying whatever errors you encountered here. So you have X, right, dot to string, all right. So that is all the navigation. So once we run it, it should give us a good navigation. Now remember all this, apart from the load event and the global variables, it is the same code for both SQL and Access databases. All right, so once we are here, this is the first record. If we try to move first, it should give us a message that says this is the first record. If we try to move previous, it should give us the same thing that says this is the end of the record. Now, if we click here, it should be able to take us to next, 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 next. All right. So we are going next, next, next. Why did I click? Okay. Let me see what is going on. So we have next, 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 next. Okay. It's time to move out of that range. What we have here, max row, if int is not max row minus 1, then int go to int plus 1 navigate record. Record. Here. Let's see what the issue is. Row at position 1. I think the problem is there's no value for max row minus 1. So let's see what max row. Okay. That's where the issue is. There's no value for max row. So max rows that the max row is equal to data set the tables brackets address book that rows the count. So this is what was causing the issue. But max rows didn't have a value. So once max row didn't have a value, we declared it as integer to be 0. So 0 minus 1 will give you minus 1. So when there's nothing in minus 1, that's what was causing this issue. So I'm sure if we should run it now and click here, and click again, it should give us a problem, right? So click it in, good. Click it in, good. So at least now it works. So we go to the end. So the problem was that we created max rows. We didn't give it a value as we did here. And then we used it here. So once you use it here without assigning it a value, it will assign 0 to it because it's a numeric value. So it will be 0. So when you come here, so we have int less than or equal to 0 minus 1. So int less than or equal to minus 1. So int is equal to minus 1. And then there's no index at minus 1. So it will give you an out of range error. All right, so that's what we have. So when you run your application now, you should be able to navigate through your record by clicking next. You should be able to navigate by clicking back. You should be able to go to the last record, come to the first record, right? And so on and so forth. So at least we have these working, we have these working. Now we are left with these guys here. Okay. So in the next stage, as we said, we are going to actually have this, and this. So as I said, this guy and this guy work hand in hand. This guy and this guy work hand in hand. And this guy and this guy both work with this also. So at the end of the day, we are going to have the 3 functions here. And each of these functionalities will have 2 functions. So this, and this, all will have about 6 or so functions or 7 functions put together. So let's start with the insert statement. So how do we insert a new record into the database? So in order to add a new record, we have to create a new sub-procedure that actually, instead of retrieving values from this and displaying them here, it will now receive them back into the database. So navigate record was taking the value from the database and assigning it to this guy. Now this new function will take the values that are here and then assigning it back to the database. So that is the kind of record that the kind of item that we are going to create. So in that case, we'll use the DS new row that we created, and then we will now use the various fields in the table to actually create that. So let's go ahead and see how that is done. So we come here. So we create a new sub procedure. So we create private sub. So we name it add record. So when we add record, so basically, as I said, we are going to create a new row, and then we are going to add items to the row. That is, each row would have the various columns that are there, just like the previous navigate record. We actually retrieve the data from the database, and then we assign each of these pieces of data to the various controls that are on the form. Now, this is the opposite. Now, here, we will take the form, the values that are in the form, or whatever the user has entered in the form, and then we will now try to match them with what is in the database, or the various rows and the columns that are in the database, right? So for instance, here we will go and go like this. So we have DS new row, right? Dot item, right? So here we are using not the indexes, but we are using the names of the field. All right. So the name of the field is maybe first name is equal to txt f name or text. So if you can see this, you see that this time the text box is on the right hand of the equal sign, right? So that means we are taking from the text box and we are writing into the database. The navigate records, you see that the text box was on the left-hand side. So it means we're taking from the database and we're assigning to the text box. So basically the navigate record and then the add records are actually two opposite sub procedures that we are creating. All right. So we are going to basically just copy this and paste, and then just edit it thing 8 times. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now remember, I will have 8 because I made my first column auto-generated, so I don't have to insert values there. But if you did not make your first contact ID an auto-generated field and the user has to provide a value for it, what it means is that it will have to come in and then you have to add that to this list. So you will have maybe 9 instead of 8. So here we will have the first name, we have the last name, and we have the gender, and we have date of birth, and we will have email, phone number, and address and details. Okay. And we have address, and then we have details. Now we come here, we change it to what? L name. We change it to DMB gender. And we change it to date time picker dot value. And we change it to ext email dot text. Ext phone dot text. Ext address dot text. Ext details dot text. So this is the method that, or this is the sub procedure that we will create for this work. So now when we want to add, we call this, it will basically assign the text box to this particular field, and then any value that is provided to this text box will be inserted in this field when it is called. All right. So the next thing now, after we create this, is to program this. Now, when we click on this, we want it to make this field editable, right? And then we want it to enable the commit, and we want it to enable the cancel. So when you click on this, it will clear all the data that is here, make these fields editable, and then disable this, and then enable this and this. So that when the user is filling and he decides he doesn't want to enter the data anymore, he cancels, or if he's satisfied with what he has entered, he commits. Only after he cancels or he commits will all these items here become accessible. Now, once they become accessible, then these guys here also must become read-only, right? So you only put these here in edit mode if you click on this or if you click on this. But any other thing you click would have to put them on edit mode or read-only. Okay, so when we click here, we are supposed to clear whatever data is here and then prepare these text boxes for data to come in. So once the data comes in, then you click on commit, then it will permanently write this data into the database. So we start by doing the add. So when we click on the add, what should happen? You should disable some of the buttons and enable some of the buttons, and then it will clear the text, and then you should enable the text boxes. All right. So we disable some text boxes. So BTN commit should be enabled. Dot enable goes through. Then BTN add dot enabled equals false. Then BTN update dot enabled equals false. Apart from update, which other one do we need to? Okay, the delete will have to also be disabled. So BTN delete dot enabled equals false. All right. So at the end of the day, the only button that should be editable, right, should be cancel and commit, right? They are the ones that should be activated. All the rest should be deactivated. So commit, okay, so cancel, BTN, cancel, dot enable equals true. Right, so it has to be able to cancel. So when you set that up, you clear all the records. So clear records. And then after you clear the records, you enable the control. That is, you now make all these ones editable so that they can now edit it. All right. So what was the name of it? Enable control. So enable control. So once you call that, then you give the person instruction. So you have message box. So show. You have please fill in the information. information and select commit to save. Right. So once you are done that, I think you can even just end there. So this is basically how you prepare the grounds. So this button here doesn't actually write the data into the database. It just clears everything and prepares the place for you to enter the data. Once you enter the data and you are done, then you now click on commit. So it's commit that actually writes the data into the database, right? So when we want to use that, we would have to create a command object, and then we will now use the command object, or we create a command builder. Then we now use this command builder to now go in and then write the data into the database. All right. So let's now program the commit button. So I said this and this work hand in hand. So let's program the commit button. So as I said, we'll create a command builder object. Then we would now use that to add a new row to our table. And then when we add that new row, then we will now call our add record, which will now assign each of the text boxes that are on the user interface to a particular column inside this particular row that we've added. And then we will call the data adapter.update, which will now take the data that has been entered into the data set and then go and do the permanent change in the database itself. All right. So from the last thing that we spoke about, we said that data adapter.update actually takes the data that is stored on your computer and goes to the database and then writes or make those changes permanent in the database. All right. So let's quickly create a command object. We have time. Let's call it command object. Okay, command builder. Yeah. Command builder as a new OLEDB command builder, right? And then we pass our data adapter to it. Okay. So once we create the command builder, let's use this structure. So our new table that our new row that we created. So ds new row is equal to, so where do we want to do the new row? So data set dot tables. What table do we want to create the new row in? We want to create it in the address book. The address book table. Then new row. So once we create that new row in the address book, so what do? We call the add record to now link all these things and then bring the data into the table, because the add record actually brings in all the data that the user has entered into the text boxes and then assign them to the various columns of the various, the various columns of this new row. So once we call this, so it means all these data has been written inside this new row that is inside the address book. So once we are able to do that, so we just call it, and then we can now go and update the data that was on your data set. We can now go and update it on the main database by calling the data adapter dot update. Right, so the data adapter dot update. What are you updating? You are updating the address book. Address book. Okay. From this data set. Okay. We didn't add the new row to the data set. All right, so we have the data set dot tables bracket address book dot rows dot add. So this is the most important steps that we miss, because once we create the row, we need to add that row inside that particular table. We have to add that row to the table. So DS, so this DS is the row, as the DS new row is the new row that we just created here. So we have to now add that new row to the table. So once we add that new row to the table, then we can now create a data adapter. That is, we can now update the data adapter with the data from there. So once we do that, then we are good to go. So we create a new row, and then we use this to basically populate the row. Then we add the new row to the table that is inside the data set. And then we take that table, or we take that table that is inside the data set and go into the database and go and update the database with that data. So once we do that, then we know that our data has been written. So if there's no any error, so we'll just print a message. The message box will show new. So we can type maybe record saved successful. All right. So once you write that, then you know your record is, once it gets here, then you know your record is safe. But if it encounters any error along the way, it will just come to the catch part. It won't even execute the rest. So now we will now have to do the cosmetic part of it. That is, once we commit and it's successful, then we will have to enable this, enable this, enable this, and then disable this and disable this. Sorry. So that is what we are going to do next. So all the ones that we disable, we will enable. All the ones that we enable, we will disable, right? So that is what we are copying here. And we are bringing it here. So commit dot enable is false. Add dot enable is true. This one is true. That is update dot enable. Then delete dot enable is true. Then cancel dot enable is false. Okay. Cancel dot enable is false. So we have two falses. Play with the final false. Okay, save dot enable. Nobody enabled it, so it will still be. So we are done with this code. So the first one, we created the add record where we link the text boxes on the user interface to the various fields of the database. And then we prepared the grounds with the add click event. That is, we disable some of the buttons and enable some. And then we cleared all the data from the text boxes. And then we enabled the editing for them. Now, once we do that, then we are able to create a new row, and then we wrote the data into the row, then we attach that row into a particular data source, a particular data adapter. And then we call the data adapter to go and update the data that is inside the data set. It takes it and goes to permanently make those changes in our database in Excel or in Access. So once that is done, then we disable all the buttons that don't need to be enabled, and then we enable those buttons that need to be enabled. So now, once we are done with that, the next thing is we would go ahead and then print out if there are any errors. So we have message box show. So that is x dot to string. All right. So we will just print out any errors. Okay. So once we do that, then we know we can now go and test our application. Then we see how it works. So we see our buttons are working nicely. Now, if we want to add, so as soon as we click on this button, all right, this button here and this button here should be enabled. This button, and that button should all be disabled. So it will only be these buttons that will be active. So once we click here, it will also make these things here editable and clear all the data from here. So once we click here, all right, so now it makes all these things editable now. And then it disables all these buttons, leaving only these two buttons. So if we enter, let's say first name is maybe Buba, right? Last name is Kari, right? Kari is a male, was born was born 1989, July, all right, August 1st. Email is ERT, maybe at ss.com, right? Then his phone number is some phone number, his address is Accra, maybe he's police, right? So if we have this, then we commit. So record saved successfully. So once we commit, now let's see if we can. Okay. Now, I think let's go and see, for instance, if that is saved, because it looks like all right, it's saved. But then once we insert it, we will have to close it before we can actually access the data we've entered, which is not right. Let's see if that's really the case. So we can add, maybe let's just add any data at all. So let's REE, let's say WEET. Okay, then mail u@t.com. Then we have phone number would be maybe some number, and then address, and then detail, maybe something, right? Now if we put this and we hit on commit, it's successful. But then we're going to at one, we're going. So we are still stuck at Buba. We can't go past. Okay. So with this, I think we need to reload this form. Maybe after the try, let's reload the form. Maybe what's the name of this form? Okay, form 1. Underscore load. And then give me comma new call. After reloading the form, let's call navigate record. Okay. So we just try to forcefully restart the form by calling this method, right? So we want the form to reload or to refresh. Then we call navigate records, and then we'll see whether this time when we enter a new data, and then we can access it straight away, because the way it is working, if you go and pay your school fees, they will have to restart the system before your school fees will reflect in the system. That's not a good system. Okay, so if we do 66, let's see, commit. Okay. The other one is behavior. Let's add another one and see. Add 999. All right. We are able to add and see our results. So the next thing is to find a way to update and to delete.